So everybody, welcome. This is Finding Yourself in the Multiverse of Madness. Starting off, I'd like to introduce you to the variants of our presenters. My name is Dr. Isaac Taitz. I'm a clinical psychologist, geek psychologist, sleep psychologist. I've started All Mind Health, and I do some telepsychology for geeks and adults and children of all ages all across California. To my left.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Janina Scarlet. I'm a clinical psychologist, author, and a full-time geek. And I specialize in incorporating pop culture, including Avenger stories, into evidence-based therapy to help folks with post-traumatic stress disorder.
My name is Benjamin Taitz. I am a registered psychological associate working in forensic psychology. And I am a doctoral candidate finishing my dissertation on the effectiveness of geek therapy in building rapport and engagement among clients.
I am Brittani Oliver, Sillas-Navarro. I am a TAY clinician, so transitional age youth, so I work with 18 to 25-year-olds. I'm a marriage and family therapist, and I defend on Monday to be Dr. Brittani.
Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Scott Jordan, aka Zombie Scotty, cognitive psychologist, philosopher at Illinois State University, coming to you today as the one true vision. I brought some of my former selves with me today. I can talk about them later. Absolutely thrilled to be here.
So speaking of variants, you might notice that we have a few variants here on the stage. Some of us are versions of Doctor Strange from different universes. Some of us are different versions of the Scarlet Witch or Wanda Maximoff, depending on how you interpret it. And each of us has multiple facets of our identities. We're not always the same person, depending on who we're with. As we're younger, we're a certain version. We like certain shows. As we're older, we like presumably different shows, sometimes grittier, sometimes sillier. So as we are developing our senses of selves, we change, we adjust, we adapt. And throughout the normal course of development, we have variants, we have changes that will happen to us. So though we have some extremes to begin with, we'll relate it back to ourselves. To start off with, we're going to discuss who is the individual self.
So this is, of course, the ship of Theseus argument that the two visions have at the end of WandaVision. And I'm here to tell you this is a pointless argument when it comes to yourself. It's a Western practice to try to ask questions about a real self. Asking if you replace all the planks, is it still the ship of Theseus? That's a philosophical issue, but it's not relevant to the self. If we could go to the next slide. This is from A Culture Ghost in the Shell, 1995, Mamoru Oshii. This is a conversation between an AI that's been created by a secret security service that put it out into the internet to do espionage and steal identities and such. It is trying to actually download itself into a female cyborg because it wants to be part of the world as us, as opposed to floating around in the ocean. Well, what happens is the AI has taken on a body and is trying to persuade this cyborg secret security woman to let it merge with her. And her first response is, but how can I guarantee I'll be the same? And his reply is, it's your desire to stay the same that impedes you. And that idea is very important because we all have to struggle very hard to be someone. And so this is a scene from WandaVision. The Wanda bubble is probably one of the most powerful visual images of cinema in the last 20 years. And though it looks like Wanda has to create a bubble that protects her, protects her trauma, keeps it in a certain place, you all live in Wanda bubbles. And those Wanda bubbles are our memories. How many of you have ever been talking to your friend about how good that last episode of WandaVision was and suddenly find yourself falling down the stairs, right? You thought unconsciously that you had reached the floor, but you hadn't, right? The point is you were telling yourself a story about gravity that whole time that you didn't know you were telling yourself. And it's that ability to let our memories fill in these unconscious stories we call expectations that let you be a self. If you don't generate these memories that create boundaries for your experiences, you're diagnosed as schizophrenic. Because you experience hallucinations, you experience delusions, you experience thoughts that your brain is creating, but you don't know your brain is creating it. So we all have these boundaries on our identities, and those boundaries change with time. So what a lot of therapists do is try to put people in different spaces to help them generate different memories, to create different boundaries, which lets them expect different things about themselves. So the self will inevitably change, and it will forever have a Wanda bubble. That's the kind of thing I wanted to say.
As we have our sense of self, we have this concept of who we are, what we should expect to go forward, how our body should maintain, and that we should be safe. But unfortunately, sometimes that doesn't stay. And this is what we refer to as trauma. So to start off, Wanda, can you tell us a little bit about Wanda?
So in the series and in the comic books, we learn about Wanda. We learn that she and her little brother witnessed the death of their parents, who were killed by a missile during an ongoing strike on their city. Witnessing massive deaths like that, especially deaths of loved ones, can be extremely traumatic for people, especially for children who are clinging to safety. And for little Wanda, who was huddled up under the bed next to her brother, they spent several days wondering if the missile in front of them was going to explode. And if any of you have ever had a near-death experience, for many of us, that near-death experience might last several seconds. It is terrifying, and it is something that can be imprinted for the rest of our lives. We might be having flashbacks and nightmares about it. But the longer we spend in that near-death experience, the more traumatic that experience becomes. And for Wanda, having grown up in this war-torn country, she felt very alone, minus her brother. He was the only connection that she had. And so it's not surprising that she sought this sense of belonging in different kind of radicalized groups. She wanted to feel a sense of family. Now, in Los Angeles and really in places all over the world, we see people looking for a sense of belonging in different ways. And for some people who are fortunate enough to have supportive families or join some kind of clubs and organizations that are supportive for them, they find that sense of belonging relatively easily. But for other people who are less fortunate, people who grew up with maybe not having their parents in their lives or not having a safe or supportive structure, might find themselves yearning for this sense of belonging. And so they might be prompted to join another organization, such as a gang or another place where they find that sense of safety and belonging. And so I think that each and every one of us is born with this wish to belong. And it's this wish that leads to us feeling very nervous about being left behind. So I'm wondering, just by a show of hands, how many of you have ever felt lonely? Yeah, me too, still, every day. So each and every one of us, I think, wears these masks. And I'm not talking about the awesome like cosplay masks or, the necessary COVID masks. I'm talking about the, hi, how are you? I'm fine, how are you? kind of masks where we pretend that we're fine. And I think that we say that because we might be afraid that if we tell the truth, we'll be cast out. And I think so many of us are terrified that if we tell the truth, that we will be rejected, not knowing that the person next to us feels just as lonely, feels just as rejected, and is just as afraid of being cast out. And I think it's shows like this, shows like WandaVision, for example, that show us the core of our humanity, the core of our post-traumatic growth, the core of our healing, that is found through sharing our painful stories. And that is what belonging is all about.
It's definitely this concept of connecting on these shared experiences. A lot of folks will find connection maybe in like early life because they just happen to live next to one another, and that becomes your best friend for the rest of your life, unless they move or unless they change. Wonder if there was any of the other panelists that had any thoughts on connectivity or shared identity.
Yeah, you mentioned people being born with a wish to belong. Contemporary neuroscience is pretty clear that the way people see each other is by the dynamics that one person is generating with their body, with their thoughts, whatever, actually resonating with the brain of the other person. So when you watch someone, you're actually letting them into your planning states, right? And this is why, infants are vulnerable. They do what they see. Kids are vulnerable. They do what they see. And as we develop, neural development takes place where certain areas of the brain become able to inhibit other areas of the brain, and that's what lets you actually be sophisticated. As we go, one of the things we sort of learn is who we're going to open our vulnerabilities to. So the how are you today and that sort of script we run through is also a way to just, try to figure out, is this someone that I'm safe with? Because when you start telling your life story to someone, you do make yourself vulnerable, and that's how sociopaths work. Right? They let you tell them your story. They don't tell you theirs. Right? And then suddenly you're writing checks. So, yeah.
But it's actually vulnerable stories like that allow us to find our sense of belonging, our group, right? And sometimes when it feels unsafe to share what we're going through, we can do that through shows, through fiction, right? And so in sharing with somebody else how we might have felt when we watched a particular maybe episode of WandaVision or maybe a particular clip of the Avengers can help us to understand our own healing process. I'm a Ukrainian-born immigrant, and watching this show has helped me on so many levels to process the horrific events in my home country right now, because it's helped me to understand trauma and loss, and being able to talk to my friends who are not immigrants or who are not from Ukraine. I'm able to use WandaVision to explain these are the horrors that are happening to my people. These are the horrors that are happening to my country. And I think that where vulnerability might be terrifying, it is also a necessary factor in forming close relationships. It is the most necessary component in establishing bonds. And sometimes the first step of doing so is perhaps through connecting with fiction.
And I'm going to bring up maybe a nasty word, just thinking about this idea of trauma bonding. And so for those who don't know, it's the concept in the sense of I'm going to share my story, I'm going to explode my traumas, my experiences, my history in the efforts to bond and efforts to connect, unconsciously or consciously. And I think that it's tricky when we share these very deep senses of ourselves, how much of it is just exploration and can I trust this person? Is this person safe with me? Or is this something that I'm trying to connect with in a very immature way? And so I think that it really toes the line, because I love sharing my story. I'm a grief therapist. I have specialized in it. I work through it because I've gone through it. I was an orphan at 21. And so I want to have conversations that are bigger than myself with people who connect with me because I want to look at them. But then you have this concept that goes back and saying, no, you shouldn't share. Sharing is bad. Sharing or connecting is bad if you do it in the wrong way. And I'm not quite sure if we understand what the wrong or right way is.
I'd like to add a little bit to, thank you. I'm pretty loud as it is, but good to have a microphone just in case. I'm going to add something to both what everyone has said, but starting with what Scott had said about sociopaths. So a lot of times when we look at crime, we see just the act itself, because that's the most obvious thing. And I mean, how many people here love watching true crime shows or listening to those true crime podcasts? Yeah, they're very fascinating because it's something that's so different than the norm of society. But if we really look beyond the act and try to look at what happened in that person's life that made this act something that was necessary for them. Because a lot of people, when they commit crimes, they don't wake up in the morning and decide, okay, I'm gonna go do this thing. Something along the line in their life, their origin story, to quote from Dr. Scarlett's book, basically started creating a lot of thought processes and distortions that, well, I'm hurt, and so I need to protect myself. And because of that hurt, because of their trauma, they might not be able to engage in healthy relationships. And so they close off themselves with the Wanda bubble too much. And they fear the vulnerability. But when we talk to clients as therapists, a lot of people think that therapists ask you what's wrong with you. But I think I can speak for most of us that we ask, what happened to you? What happened in your life that was difficult for you to manage? And let's work through it. And with people who have committed crimes, people who are offenders, that question is something that they've never been asked. And that can be really important for them to start to connect with other people and say, oh, wait, other people have gone through trauma too? Like, I'm not alone? And then they can understand, okay, well, how do we cope with it in a healthy way? How do we have healthy attachments? And then using these shows and showing them, look, this character went through literally the same thing as you. What choices did they make afterwards? How can we make the same choices? So the shows and the grief and the trauma impact our thought processes in so many different ways, but we can always make new choices. And that's what Wanda did at the end of the show. And then she made a different choice in the movie Multiverse of Madness.
So
Based off of her experiences, based off of what happened to her.
Exactly.
Those are those, vulnerability factors for her.
speaking of which, perfect transition. How about the Scarlet Witches? Tell us a little bit about what Wanda went through.
So we're gonna do a little audience participation. How many people in here have lost something? How many people in here have lost someone? Kind of shout out who? Friend, family, parent, sister? Okay. Okay. So I love grief research because this is the only thing in the world that unites all of us. The only thing. Not all of us will have sex, not all of us will fall in love, not all of us will get married, not all of us will have children, not all of us will do X, Y, Z, but we will all lose something or someone. And I think Wanda is a perfect conversation to have about grief and loss. I think that we get romanticized with these stories of a hero's arc, of call to action, and then something happens, and it's dramatic, and then the hero wins, and we all are happy. But Wanda's story is always in the middle. It's always stuck there. There's never really a resolution for her, and I think that that's a true representation of grief. Like, you're never just done with it. It never goes away. And so, with her being able to explore these realities of still being enraged and still being sad and still being hurt, like, we get to see us like a part of our society that's unique, because I think in other stories, we get to feel happy at the end, and in a lot of Wandas, we have to feel icky. We have to feel disconnected, or, oh, I see a little bit too much of myself or something else. And it's good. It's good to have these realistic versions of our reality, because otherwise we were going to feel really, really disconnected to these heroes. Because how many people would say that she's a hero? How many people would say she's a villain? How many would say both? And how many times are you both?
All the time.
A lot of times we are not always the hero in our story. A lot of times we're not always the villain. There's always mixes of gray. And I think that WandaVision and the multiverse like shows us that it's complicated. We're all gray. We're all gray people walking in this world, just trying to figure it out, trying to do day by day, trying to be as decent people as we possibly can, hopefully. Don't suck. And this is why I really resonate with her story, and going back to this idea of beginning, middle, of end. Beginning, middle, end. This is the story. This is what happens in a hero story. Beginning, middle, end. And she's stuck in the middle. She's constantly in the middle. And what do I do now? What's gonna happen to me now? Grounded in this like trauma, grounded in this loss, because she's had profound losses with her parents, and sitting there with profound losses with the love of her life, profound losses with what happened when the bubble collapsed, profound losses of trying to get something back that she wanted so desperately, and sense of self. When we talk about loss, it's not just people, it's not just things, it's who we are. I am not the version of myself that I was yesterday because of the things that happened to me. And that's really difficult to deal with, and really difficult to try to figure out. And so I think that Wanda is this perfectly complicated character that you can see as a hero, that you can see as a villain, that you can see as flawed, that you could see as complex. Like, you get to decide. And like, that's the whole point of these shows, is that you get to paint this image, like this image of who they are and who they are connected to you.
So I'm actually going to state an unpopular opinion. The stages of grief aren't accurate.
Yeah.
So the stereotypical stages of grief that are represented here were, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you're more of an expert in this area than I am, but the stages of grief were initially designed for people who are dying, not for the bereaved. So that's one. And two, they weren't really empirically validated, which means research supported. So what we know now is that grief is messy. Grief doesn't necessarily look like this, although it might include some of these emotions, but it doesn't advance in a straight line. And so some people think, well, if the bereaved person, so a person like Wanda who lost, well, everyone, her parents, her twin brother, the love of her life, if she just, goes through the denial, she's past that, if she lets, the angry out, if she stops the bargaining, if she just gets over her depression, right, she should accept it, and therefore she should be happy, right, and move on with her life. But for I think most of us who have lost someone or something, we know that's not how it works. We can't just snap our fingers and, well, aside from destroying half of the world, destroy half of our feelings, right? It doesn't work that way. The thing with feelings is that they're all or none. That's how they work. So when we deny grief, we deny joy. And so grief is something, as the other wonderful Wanda said, grief is something that stays with us forever. It's a part of everything we do, and that is because grief is an extension of love, right? As Vision so wonderfully pointed out, what is grief if not love persevering? And so grief is in everything we do and in everything we are because we love. So how could we not feel sad if the person that we lost isn't with us to enjoy a particular moment? And we might feel bittersweet, we might feel furious, and we might feel excited at other times. And these emotions are complex. And it's not that grief gets smaller over time, it's that sometimes we get bigger around it. Our life might get bigger, but it's still with us.
I just want to say, so how many days do you guys get for bereavement?
3, 5.
So you can have the most devastating loss in your life, and you better be fine on day 4. Right? This is unrealistic in this Western world. And I think about it, like I've used this analogy before, like I think about it as, is it a bee or a bear? Is it a bee? Is grief something that's kind of just buzzing around, it's annoying, that's kind of like, it's there, but it's not something that can actually like hurt me? Or is it a bear that's dangerous and potentially life-threatening? Because grief can be everything in between. It can be huge, it can hit you as a milestone, especially on anniversaries, on birthdays, on the holidays. Most hospitalizations for our kiddos happen during the holidays in the summer. Holidays because of trauma, summer because it's hot. And we think about these things where sometimes these moments, these triggers, can really hit us really, really hard, and sometimes out of nowhere. And like she said, like we have to start thinking about like how can we make sure that we are intentionally kind and compassionate towards ourselves when these things happen. Because I think in this Western world we have this idea of get over it, move on, move forward, push through, persevere. And that's not helpful when somebody is really hurting or someone's really grieving. Because who did grief perfectly? Why not? Why didn't you do it? You didn't do the things? Like, it's so silly to have this idea that there is this perfect playbook to do it. Like, it is what it is in who you are, in where you are, and how it happened. There's so many complex individual things that occur simultaneously, because one death, if it's compound, one death if it's individual, one death if it's someone that you didn't really know or understand, one death if you love them and deeply, like, it's all going to affect how you function, your age, your gender, your sexual orientation, the mode of death or how they died. All of those things play a role. And so to sum it down to this idea, especially with Wanda, that you should do it this way, and I feel like Doctor Strange really pushes, and I think really everyone in Marvel pushes her to do something that she cannot emotionally and cognitively do. And that's frustrating to watch, because it's like, who are you to judge when you haven't had similar or the same experiences? And even when we have similar or the same experiences, we are not the same people. We do not have the same like resilience levels, we do not have the same coping skills, we do not have the same boundaries, we do not have the same experiences, period. And so for grief research or for grief therapy, for those who want to participate or who ever have participated, the best thing to do is to do group therapy and individual simultaneously, because you need people to look at to say, I hear you, I see you, I've done this. I'm not you, but I know what it looks like to lose a parent. I know what it looks like to lose a brother. I know what it looks like to lose a family member or a dog or something else. Like, and then eventually group has to go away because then it's just commiserating. But you need shared experiences. And so if anybody does go through something or has gone through something, find, for lack of a better word, your tribe. Find your people. Find people that are reflected in your experience, because those are the ones that are going to help you the most. Because what hurts the most is hurting and then looking at someone who just says, that sucks.
I did want to comment on this idea, the great points you both made about thinking yourself out of it and then growing around it, or including it. What I said earlier is that your sense of self emerges out of your memories perpetually. You're telling yourself a story about gravity all the time. I have no idea how the heck I'm talking right now, right? Because my mouth and my jaw are being driven by memory, because I've done this over and over. So this idea of growing around, the idea of you can't think out of it, you have to live.
Yeah.
And you have to create a different system of memories for yourself. And those memories aren't going to not include trauma. They're going to include you being with it in a different way. And that's precisely what therapy does. It's geared towards giving you a different way of being with your trauma. And the success, the healing, comes from actually living that life day by day, minute by minute, until it becomes what you unconsciously remember about yourself, and therefore unconsciously expect about yourself. So it's work, and it's lived life. It's not thinking. The thinking helps you direct what you're going to do, but you have to live it to make it change.
So I'm going to jump on with that. Also, is in group therapy, one thing that clients learn is to listen to what the emotion is telling them, because we can say the words, I understand you, and yes, I've been there. But if the client is not listening to themselves, if they're not hearing what their own body is telling them, then it's going to make it that much more difficult for them to work with their trauma, or to grow from it, or to learn to acclimate it into their new worldview. And with trauma, that is very difficult, because trauma is so earth-shattering. That's the definition of trauma, right? Like your world shattered. So we need to then understand, okay, what is grief telling you? What is that specific emotion telling you right that moment? Okay, how can we use that? How can we incorporate that into your new way of interacting with people in your life and forming new relationships? And when clients are able to listen to their bodies and listen to their emotions, then they can start to form healthy relationships that are supportive and help them to grow as a person, and not just get them back to where they were pre-trauma, because that's not possible. So we want to be a new version of ourselves. We want to, as the title of the panel says, find out which variant you want to be, and say, okay, well, how do I get to that variant? How do I be that version of myself?
So part of the journey of getting to the version of yourself that you want to be, unfortunately, as we mentioned before, is not going to be easy. It is not a straight and narrow path, easily carved by many people before you, because everyone's path is going to be different. Not necessarily through trauma. I hope that we don't need to experience too much more than we already have, but unlikely. And so, as we keep in mind that trauma itself might be cyclical, the whole concept of these ideas, these stages, as wrong as they are, was also reconsidered, that we are going to be falling in and out of those stages. And that some of us may be what was illustrated as dreamwalking, as trying to embody that self that was before the trauma, that pre-trauma self. If I can just get back to normal, to the way I was beforehand, to the version of who I was beforehand. Many of my patients are coming to me and asking, when can I get back to who I was before? And I tell them the idea is not to get back to that. It's to get beyond that, to get to what might be considered post-traumatic growth. Bit of a Freudian slip there.
That's so hard because it's your memories that are creating that Wanda bubble for you, right? It's those memories that are continually being thrown into your present as plans and expectations for the future. What's keeping you back is a desire to be the same self. You can't be the same self if you don't have the same memories. But every day you live, you're changing your memories, so you're not going to be the same self. So the struggle to get back to a perfect time is actually works counterintuitively to what it is that you're trying to do. Absolutely.
Can't step in the same river twice. So if the part of the river that you were in before was nice and smooth, but then there was some rapids, okay, then we can get to a nice beautiful waterfall. Hopefully we don't fall off it, but maybe we'll have like a jetpack that can take us over it and we can land safely and admire the view. And we can then go down the stream after that. It's changing, but we change with it.
And I'm a big proponent of this idea that as a clinician, it's not my job to push you, it's not my job to lead you, it's my job to walk beside you. And that means if you cannot see the light, then I'll sit in the darkness with you. And it's okay to be dark sometimes. It's okay to have joy. It's okay to feel indifferent. It's okay to have incongruence and all the things in between. And so I don't want to walk away from here saying like, just be sad. Do it. Because there is hope and there is resilience and there is growth or post-traumatic growth or grief. Because there will be. At some point you'll wake up and feel okay. And okay is a good thing. Good is a good thing. Great is a good thing. And there's times where it's going to be really good and there's going to be times where it's really bad. And when we think about not just Wanda, when we think about just grief in general, the mix of emotions, because I don't necessarily like the stage model because there's nothing that's going to actually go linear. It is really phases. And so what I like to talk to my clients about is like, what are my like commandments? What am I allowed to do? What are my Bill of Rights, my grief Bill of Rights? I'm allowed to feel, I'm allowed to hurt, I'm allowed to cry, I'm allowed to be happy, I'm allowed to enjoy this moment. Like, there's so many things that you are given. You have so much more power than you think, even when we feel powerless. And so having the freedom to feel, I think, is really important because your low lows aren't always going to be there and your high highs aren't either. And so realizing that the human experience, especially for her, we see these very, very different variants of her exist. This is this pretend facade of happiness, right? And then we have a different version. But they're both her. They're both within her. They're both within us. And so understanding the complexity of the human experience, that all of these hats that we wear are real. Like, they are pieces of us. And so
This hat is definitely real.
there's one part for therapy that's called like a parts theory. There's parts of you. So there's a egomaniacal part, there's a happy part, there's a sadistic part, there's a sad part. And so trying to figure out how they all balance and how this puzzle piece comes together. Because you're never 100% good, you're never 100% bad, you're never 100% sad, you're lots of things simultaneously. And this is what we see with Wanda, and this is what we see with not just the show, but just her character in general, play out to see what all her parts are and what that means in the human experience.
We are both the sculptor and the statue. We are building ourselves as we go. Every day that you do an action, you make new neural connections, and the you that you were is changed. And so, as you construct yourself as you're going, you can somewhat steer the ship a bit. So to that end, when I'm doing my bereavement work, I like to go towards continuing bonds. I did my dissertation on the cultural differences in bereavement dreams. And after interviewing hundreds of people, I found that there was no major differences in the dreams that we had of our deceased as it changed between the religions or the ethnicities, only a little bit between the genders. The more masculine folks will have a kind of a daily activity dream. The same thing that you used to do in daily life, you tend to do with your deceased, with your bereaved, in your dreams. So the habits you make during your life persist. And for the more feminine folks, they tend to either dream of the deceased either as separating, as being either saying goodbye or being blocked off, having barriers put between them, or they'll see the deceased as being happy and healthy and radiant. And these mirror the waking life grief experiences that most masculine folks tend to go through grief, sometimes even just by staying productive, showing themselves that they can continue to be the version of themselves that they're used to doing. And most women tend to connect with their loved ones. The social connection can be very important. And so either maintaining the connection or having those close to us to bolster us as we are going through tough times can be really helpful, at least for the majority. Those folks on either end that don't quite get through past grief with an A+ actually benefit from doing how the other side does. So, for this study in particular, for my work with my patients, I try to get them to practice these continuing bonds. Which ones work best for them? There's going to be the intentional ones, like going to a memorial or doing something in honor of the deceased. There's unintentional ones of hearing their voice or smelling them or even dreaming about them. And the dreaming one, we might have a little bit of intentionality. If you set an intention beforehand, you might be able to bring it about. But ultimately, what you choose to do with your life, how you go through your days, every little decision, how much do you try to be a bit more of the hero, anti-hero, or villain, shapes what you eventually become. It's not exactly you are what you eat, you are what you do, again and again and again. And if it's hard to do by yourself, you can do with friends, with therapists, with family, whichever works for you. So I never tell a patient what to do. We go over ideas, and more often than not, they thought of a much better one just by talking about it. So we have about 10 or so minutes left. I wanted to give a little bit of time if any of the other panelists had last thoughts on these kind of steps forward, and then I want to give some time to the room to ask some questions, and then a little bit of last for any variants that want to take some pictures.
15 seconds. These little guys never go away. All they do is change, right? We recurse on them, meaning we refine them in a new context with new people, but they're always there. That's why it's so fun to be a nerd this late in life, right? Because I was a nerd reading Lord of the Rings at 15, and now I'm doing psychology panels on Lord of the Rings at my age that I won't disclose. So, it's an absolute
25?
No, we're going on 20.
Keep your eye out for the Lord of the Rings panel we're doing later.
Tomorrow. I just want to say that being a villain or a hero, it shouldn't be a dichotomous thing, as Brittany had mentioned, because we are all both. But also, I like to think of villains as basically a hero that didn't really kind of learn the healthy coping skills. So a villain can still be a hero in their own story, and really most villains are the heroes of their own story. They may be just going about it in a different way than the heroes of the story go about it. So there's nothing inherently wrong with being a villain. It's how do you be the villain of your story. If you want to make some new choices, if you want to try a different way of doing things, because the life of a hero is too boring, so you can spice things up a bit.
A redemption arc is much more fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll add to that. When I'm working with clients, I talk to them about, we have adaptive coping skills, like running, journaling, art, and then maladaptive coping skills, like substance use, promiscuous sex, whatever it is. And I want to always focus on, at the end of that sentence, it's still a coping skill. What Wanda did was a coping skill. It was something that got her through. And we have the opportunity to really kind of change the narrative or restory our experience. And we are so powerful. Our brains are so powerful, we can convince ourselves of anything. She convinced herself that this was the best way. In not just the show, but also in this film. And so if you know that, then we know that change is possible, and that change is something that we can do. Does it look pretty all the time? No. Are we gonna get it right all the time? No. But just knowing that a maladaptive coping skill is still a coping skill. If I know that is true, then I can have an adaptive coping skill. I just have to find one that works just as well. And that's the hard part. Because getting blackout drunk when you're feeling feels is a lot easier than feeling feels and going bowling. So we just gotta find one that's powerful enough to resonate in both worlds.
I wanted to add one thing. I think in order for us to feel all the feels, sometimes the best way to do that is when we feel truly seen, right? When somebody makes a safe space for us, when somebody is not trying to talk us out of that experience. And so what I wanted to tell you was something that I wish I knew way before I ever became a therapist, which is that if you're feeling a certain way, your feelings are valid. And if somebody's trying to talk you out of your feelings, then they're not a safe person for you to talk to in that moment about this particular issue at that time. But that doesn't mean that your experience is wrong. And it means that there's somebody out there who feels the same way as you. So find your people, find your group, find your sidekicks, find your Avengers, find a therapist or a supportive person or a support group. But please know that you're allowed to feel the way that you're feeling. And very often it is through a supportive, kind, compassionate presence that we start to heal when we feel truly seen and understood by another person.
So we've got a few minutes left. If there are any questions from the audience, you're more than welcome to come on up. You can make a line here, and we'll hand the mic over this way. Just as a heads up, we do have some recording equipment going on, so if you have more personal questions, we'll be able to talk about those outside, but we won't be able to do actual therapy today. But if anyone is interested, we've got cards. So, any questions from the audience? By all means, come on up.
Hi. Okay, so my question is, I work at a school in East Los Angeles. I work with children that have been affected by gang violence, and I'm obviously here because I'm a big superhero nerd. And so I was wondering how I could incorporate like my love for superheroes and also their love for familiar stories in a way to help heal.
Great question. First of all, thank you. Thank you for the amazing work that you do, and thank you for just being an incredible person that you are. I think for most people, for most kids, having one compassionate, supportive adult that just cares for them can make all the difference in the world. I think that sometimes having conversations as to what superheroes we all like and what we like about them can allow people to start sharing. And then for many people, just understanding that they're looking for that sense of community can be really, really helpful. And also understanding that no matter what happens, that redemption is always possible. I think that can be really helpful for a lot of people too.
I would agree. Asking them about the characters that they like, whether it's heroes or villains or anti-heroes or anyone in between, and just have them tell you that character's story. Because more often than not, they're sharing their story at the same time, and they just don't realize it. Because it's difficult for us to share our stories. It's difficult for us to process what happened to us. But I can tell you all about Batman's trauma. I can tell you all about Hugo Strange. I can't tell you about myself, though, But through that story, you're understanding what is coming up for them and what is important for them. I think that would be a helpful thing.
Yeah, I was just, yes.
Double yes.
I would kind of add on to what my brother Strange was saying, that starting off with connecting on like, what is your fandom? What is your favorite show, book, movie, game, whatever? And then if there's one that we connect on, easy, great. Oh, fantastic. Who was your favorite character? Oh, I love that arc. That was really cool. You remember when they did that thing? What part are you at? I don't want to spoil you. Now you're excited. Now you're connecting on more than just you're here because you had something bad happen to you. You're here because your teacher told you to come over here. So this gives some credit that you can use and spend, and especially when they're talking about something tough, or you know there's something tough that you want to connect with them on. You don't have to talk about them. You remember when this character went through that problem, right? Yeah. What was that like? What do you make of that? Oh, it was terrible, blah, 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 blah. Maybe not blah, blah, blah. But yeah, and have you ever felt that way? Has it ever been like that for you? And then the door opens. And even if they don't say yes right then, you made a connection. So, great plan.
And a quick thing, instead of asking people about the weather these days as a way of safely encountering, I ask them what they're watching.
Yeah.
Because pulp culture is so prolific and everywhere now. And what they tell you they're watching tells you a lot.
Squid Game.
That was a great answer. I wish I had clipped that for my show. But hi, I'm Thomas with the Joystick Show and the Geek Freaks Podcast Network. My question is about Black Panther: Wakanda Forever.
Woo!
Yeah, all right. Okay, good. The first part is non-spoilery. The second part is spoilery. Has everybody seen it? No?
Just cover your ears, just la la la.
Yeah, is that all right? Is that all right if I spoil it, everybody? Okay. So the first part, really quickly, what did you think about the grief that was displayed in Black Panther: Wakanda Forever? And the second question is, sorry, spoilers again, is how did you react when...
How about this?
Yeah.
Because we're short on time.
Right.
We'll just answer the first one.
Okay. I want to ask the second one more, though.
And we can talk that next one outside, because the next panel's going to...
Perfect.
I'll just say that the entire movie was a masterclass in understanding grief in a cultural lenses.
Yes.
I'm not from either of those cultures that are presented in the movie, but you could really see how their mythos helps them to process grief in different ways, even within the same culture, even within the same family. So I thought that was an amazing movie about grief.
Yeah, I just contributed to, I just interviewed for this actually, so on this exact topic. Specifically with Suri, you get to see her arc and how she's different and she changes and she shifts and it's hard and soft and everything in the middle. But like he was saying, it's a cultural experience. Like you guys get to be in the seat with them and see that this is why with grief, with twin studies, like we see that one shared experience isn't going to happen or isn't going to affect one person the same way. And so we have this group of people who all grieve differently and no one grieves right. And who's to say what is the quote unquote right or best way? And so I think that the movie really played a beautiful, like heartfelt silhouette, really not just to Chad, but like just to say like this is a representation of who we are as people. This is a representation of how we grieve, how we love, how we fight, how we hurt, how we have family, and what we feel our responsibility to each other is. Because my responsibility might look different to yours, and I might have to push something down, like you were saying before, and I have to push joy down as well. Or I might feel like I can be in all of my experiences. And that's grief. It's messy, it's dirty, it's clear as mud. And so I think that even though there are some people, some critics who didn't like it because it wasn't like as much showmanship, it gave heart. This was a true heartfelt movie about love and about compassion and about culture and about richness. And I'm not just saying that because I'm Black, but it is like it's a love story, and so is Wanda. Like both of them are true love stories, and I think that's the great part about grief, that we're all it's all love.
It's also a fantastic depiction of cultural collective grieving. Ritual is what I would call a cultural Wanda bubble. So we all sort of put ourselves in this same space of expectations because we've lived with it, we've seen it happen over and over. And what that does is just give us a collective system to just allow us to move and feel, right? When you don't have that during those places, if you try to manage that by yourself, right, as opposed to collectively, it's much more difficult and things can go much more awry. Right, so training people, modeling for them in your culture how to be grieving is very important, very helpful, and something our culture could do a little better.
Yes.
If I can add one last thing, and then we'll need to wrap up. Spoiler-free answer as well. I felt that this movie was a particularly amazing illustration of the various approaches to the continuing bonds. You see how the culture prescribes a method to go through the grieving process. We've had years and years and years of grieving and loss, and we've seen how people do it. And we have rituals that seem to help push it along. But not everybody is ready for those rituals. Not everybody does well with those rituals, and we need to find our own approach, and that's what that series shows. And additionally, throughout the movie, even though he's not there, you feel Chadwick there the whole time. That continuing bond is always there. So thank you very much, everybody, for continuing here with us. Feel free to talk and ask us later. Any variants that want a quick picture, we're going to take one right over here.